welcome to another episode of Them&Us. I'd like to introduce you to my husband, Errol Bennett. Errol,
hi.
And today we are going to be touching on bereavement. Now, bereavement is a huge subject, and it's also a very taboo subject for a lot of people, but it shouldn't be taboo because we came into this world one way and we all have to leave it one way. It's only one way we can leave it. But we want to talk about the effect it has on the people that are left behind and how it affects our lives. One way or another, we're all affected, and I'm sure that most of us watching this will have had some experience of bereavement. So today, I'm going to be speaking to Errol about when his sister died, and we're just going to be drawing on some of his experiences and some of the experiences that we've picked up along the way since then. So Errol's going to tell us, how old were you when your sister died?
When my sister passed away, I was 16 years old.
16. So you would have still been at school, right?
Yes, I was.
And how do you feel that you were treated during that time? Because it was a sudden death. She wasn't ill. There was nothing wrong with her. In fact, just quickly tell us how she died. Very briefly.
My sister got married in August and died in October of the same year. So I went to my sister's wedding, and a few months later, my sister passed away. She was pregnant at the time, and she passed away in hospital, giving birth to my nephew.
So it was a sudden death. They weren't expecting it. I think that must be one of the most traumatic experiences of bereavement that people can have when you're just not expecting it. If you're sick and you've had a chance to say goodbye, but when they haven't been ill and something like this happens, it becomes very traumatic. So Errol says he was 16, he was still at school. And how did people treat you? How do you feel that you were treated at that time? Did they let you talk about it? Did anyone come and talk to you about it? Did they give you a chance to express how you were feeling at the time?
As a 16-year-old, nobody came and talked to me, not even my parents. I just had people coming around to the house. To me, they were celebrating, eating, drinking. Never experienced this before, non-tradition, what us Caribbeans do. And I felt left out. I suppressed everything inside of me, literally. Didn't let anything come out. I was angry. My parents didn't say anything to me. I was just left to get on like nothing to happen.
Like nothing ever happened. And for a lot of people, I think that they try to deal with their pain by internalizing it. But whatever you suppress, you ultimately, eventually have to express. So it's going to come out some form or another. The loss of something very precious, the loss of people, it will affect you in some form or another. How did you get through the funeral, Errol?
I didn't go to my sister's funeral. I didn't want to have the last memories of her going down into the ground, into the coffin. So I did not go to the funeral.
You didn't go to the funeral?
No.
Oh. Now, I don't think Errol had been to many funerals prior to this event. And for us, my mum was she loved funeral. Mm-hmm. So she would drag us to every funeral that she heard was going. Especially if we were off sick, even if we were off sick from school and there was a funeral, Mum would drag us to the funeral. Come, so-and-so dead. We're going funeral today. Love the funeral, boy. So we were brought up not to be afraid of going to funerals. Now, some people choose not to go. Was it your choice not to go, or did they tell you not to go?
It was my choice.
Why? Why didn't you want to go?
Because the last time I saw my sister was laying in the hospital bed, and that's the picture I wanted to remember. That was the image I wanted to remember in my mind.
Yes. And after the funeral, what then happened? Did anybody speak about it after the event?
No. I started to internalize things. Thoughts were going through my head. Cried in secret. Just had a load of memories, loads of thoughts. Why did this have to happen? And it took me a long, long time to get over this trauma that I was going through. And it took me 40 years before I visit my sister's graveside.
How many years?
40 years.
40 years. It took him 40 years before he visited his sister's graveyard, which was only a couple of years ago. I remember the day well.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was because her son wanted to go and visit his mum's. It was his birthday, and he wanted to go and visit his mum's grave, having not been there.
That's my nephew.
That's his nephew. What was the relationship like with your nephew after your sister passed away?
There wasn't really a relationship because I had wished that he had passed and my sister had lived, because I didn't really know my nephew, but I knew my sister. So there was a discommunication between the two of us, really and truly.
And bearing in mind, his sister didn't come over to England until she was 12. So I'm not sure how many years they actually had together before her passing. Was it about 7 years?
About 7 years we had together, yeah.
And during that time, they were very close. And she was always looking out for him. She was a very, very special lady by the sounds of it. And she very caring and loving. So I believe that for Errol, it was very, very traumatic. Having lost her, not having any. And at the time I met him, he only had one friend. One. All you need is one, I suppose. Just one. One good friend. That's all you need, right? That's all you need, just one good friend.
It's true.
And he didn't. I didn't know her because, of course, she was already gone by the time I met him. But when I met him, he was still dealing with the trauma of it all, wasn't you?
Still dealing with that trauma because as a child, I knew about my sister who lived out in Jamaica with her grandma. So the day when she came over here, she was 12 years old. And I remember getting ready to go to the airport, so excited to meet my sister for the first time. And she wasn't on that plane flight. So came home very disappointed. And a few days later, we got a telephone call saying that my sister was at the airport. So my parents had to go down there and get my sister. And when I saw her for the first time, I remember the pink dress she had on with a bow at the back, very short hair, but a beautiful smile. And yeah, that was the first time I met my sister.
Wonderful. And then after she died, he ultimately suppressed his feeling. And then something really traumatic happened, which impacted the trauma. What happened after that impacted the trauma?
What really happened after that is that previously before that, I had my sister was a twin, and her sibling passed away as a baby when 6 months old. And previously before that, my brother out in Jamaica passed away. So I thought that I was next, because there seemed to be a pattern.
Yep, he thought that he was next. So when there was an accident, let's talk about the accident, because then there was an accident which traumatised you even further, right?
Yeah, I was out with my cousin driving the car, and there was a little motorbike accident, and I knocked my head against the passenger window, and from then I started to pass out.
Then he started to pass out. Trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And that's why it's so important to talk about how you're feeling when things like that happen, when you lose someone. The loss of someone can just send your mind into a spiral. So there was an accident, which, as he said, he said it was a little accident, yet that little accident caused more trauma. Because, as he said, he started blacking out, started passing out, and they couldn't figure out why he was passing out. And so this trauma affected his mind and his brain and brought about some other impacts, like your memory. How did it affect your memory?
I had a loss of memory of some of my past. Reading, trouble at school, mixing with the wrong company, basically looking for a way of escape of what's gone on.
And although he didn't get into trouble per se, as if, he wasn't in trouble with the police or trouble with anybody else, he was just fighting with his demons. And he found that he couldn't remember things of the past. He couldn't coordinate things that normally come naturally to him. His coordination was out. He would have mental blocks about things. His reading was affected, and it's not so much his reading per se, but he couldn't string a sentence together. So his mind was quite traumatized by the events that led up to. He was very traumatized by the effects of his sister's passing, and a lot of us we would experience different symptoms. I want to ask about reliving. Did you find that every time an event, i.e. birthday, celebration, Christmases, Easter, how did you deal with those main events after the passing of your sister?
I didn't. Things was never the same again. Special events, I didn't want to be at family functions, didn't want to be there because my sister was missing.
And although it might look like, oh, what's the matter with her, she's making light of it, you have to remember that you have to, as I try to explain it like this, right? Bereavement is something that you either grow with or you grow out of, and it affects everybody very differently. We do fostering. We find that when we take our children away from previous carers, we go through a transitional period where they either stomp and try and mash up the hour, or they go internalize it, and then you have to keep talking to them until they come out of themselves. My father was the biggest loss I sensed in my life, but I blocked it out by thinking of all the negative things. All the negative things throughout my life, blocked it out. I blocked it out by writing a book, thinking that it would ease the pain. And every time I had to edit that book, it would keep bringing stuff up. But I recently had an epiphany. Yes, I did. I had an epiphany. And I was quite surprised because I'd gone to bed. I wasn't thinking about anything. But I woke up in the morning with this person. The thing is, I couldn't see who the person was. I could only hear the person talking. And they were saying to me, right, you need to stop now. You need to stop. Your father was a fantastic man. He was an extraordinary person. He was an exemplary man. He fed you all. He had 9 of you. He clothed you all. He never went to jail. He worked all the days of his life until he was sick. He cooked for you. He cleaned. He loved you when you were little because he loved little children. Your dad was an extraordinary man. He was an extraordinary man. You need to stop now. That was my epiphany. And I woke up thinking, what? Who? Where did that voice come from? Who was it? And why are they telling me this now? Why? And I went into my bathroom and I just stood there looking in the mirror like, I ain't never seen him like that before. I ain't never visualised him in that context. I would have never used none of them words to describe my dad. But I got a wake-up call. And that day, I took my sister out for a coffee and I told her what happened, and she said to me, Dawn, and she said, Carly, what are you talking about? My dad was an extraordinary man. Have you never seen him like that? I said, no, I never saw him like that at all. She said he was an exemplary man. Why do you think they called him at all the events? Why do you think everybody wanted him for every event that was going? Why do you think everything that happened, he was the first person that was called? I said, no, I don't know. I said, I never thought of him like that. I just thought of all the bad bits. And then I realised, even over that very coffee, that it was the bad bits that made me cope with the loss. It was thinking about him in a negative light and all the negative stuff that made me cope with the loss. But after he had gone, I did not realise, because every October we used to go to Alton Towers for the firework. It was a ritual, an annual ritual. Yeah. And the first time we didn't go was the year that he died. In fact, we had to ring them that night, the night that he died, and cancel the vacation. And I didn't realise that every October this demon would come and bother me and take me to a deep, dark, low place. And I didn't make the connection that it was the same time that my dad died until years later. And when I realised, I thought, right, okay, so this thing just remembers what happened psychologically deep somewhere it's buried, and I need to make it stop. It needs to stop coming to haunt me every year. Did you have anything like that?
Yes, I did. Every October, it was a sad time. Didn't know why it was a sad time. Then when I realised that's the year, October was the year my sister passed away.
The year my dad passed away. I didn't realise that it was October. I didn't even make the connection.
Yeah, just went to this deep, dark place and didn't want to connect with anybody. Didn't want to get close to anybody, just in case I lost him again. And I couldn't afford to put myself out there to go through that trauma that I went through. So I can just isolate myself, really and truly.
Yeah. And then we had to break the cycle. And then when I clocked what was going on, I realised that I needed to break the cycle. And I believe the cycle is broken because I didn't remember last year, October. When last year, October came and went, I didn't even realise it had been and gone. So I then realised that the cycle had been broken. And sometimes we just have to find ways to deal with the trauma of bereavement.
The way I dealt with it was actually going to my sister's graveside. And the day I went there with my mum, my brother, and my nephew and his son, my nephew's son, that was a beautiful day. It was like it was fresh.
Can't leave it 40 years,
It was 40 years. It did take me 40 years, but I'm so glad that I did it. And it gave me that peace of mind. It gave me that release that I was looking for all these years.
Yeah.
That's when I found it.
And there you go. You see, that's what it took. It took him. Now, if he'd gone to the graveside like normal people don't put down flowers after the event, it might not have taken that long, you know, and I think that's why we do it. I think that's why we visit gravesides and put down flowers and tidy up the graves and make the graves pretty. What are you going to do?
I wasn't ready yet.
40 years in the wilderness.
I was still holding on to something. Yeah, 40 years, yeah.
In the wilderness.
It was 40 years in the wilderness, but it was my experience, yeah. And I didn't want to let go yet. And actually going there to the graveside, that's when I actually had to let go. Broke down and cried like it was just fresh. But the graveside, it was beautiful. It was a peaceful day, nice day. Yeah, and I'm glad I did it.
Wonderful. So, I think what we've gleaned from today's lesson is don't leave it 40 years, number one. Number two, find ways to deal with it before it becomes a deep-rooted trauma in your life. And, yes?
It's funny you say that because going to my nephew's wedding.
Oh, yes, I forgot about the nephew's wedding, which was just last year. November. Was it November?
Yes, last year.
No, it wasn't. It was February.
February this year. Yeah,
oh, it's February this year. It wasn't November.
Going to that wedding was another trauma for me. I was the only family member that was there. And I'm seeing my...
When he says he's the only family member that was there, I couldn't be there because my mum... It was her birthday.
Yeah.
But when he says he was the only family that was member, he means from his family.
From my family.
So his brother couldn't go, his mum couldn't go, and he was the only representation from his family. That's what he means, yeah?
So I had to go there because it was my nephew. And it was like another trauma happened. I didn't know what side to go and sit on when I got there. And I haven't seen my ex-brother-in-law for over 40 years. And I was just sitting in the back of this wedding, just eye water just running down my eyes. And he came over to me and he comforted me, hugged me, and said, yeah, he's sorry. Things could have been different. No words were said. Back in those days, we didn't really talk about death. Nobody came to the kids and talked to us about how we felt. And he said, the way things happened, if he could have done it differently, he would have done it differently. And we had a good talk at that wedding, but I was literally traumatized at that wedding.
Why were you traumatized at the wedding?
Because in my mind I said, my sister should have been there to see her son get married. And it really hurt. It hurt. And I knew that I had to be there for him. Because that was my sister's child, which is my nephew.
Yeah, I guess it was a shame that the others couldn't be there, but at least you were there. And as you said, I think for a lot of families, it's easier just to avoid the situation and not face it head on, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to find when you try and face things head on. So they just try and avoid the situation altogether, don't they? So there you go. Everybody has their own way of dealing with bereavement. But I think it's very important to get counselling if you ever feel that you need it.
Definitely get counselling. If I knew about counselling then, I would have got counselling, because I know it really would have helped me. Because what I literally did was just suppress everything inside of me. And I think it came to a time in my life where it just went whoosh. It just exploded. I couldn't deal with it anymore. Even simple things like watching a movie and they mention the word sister, that would trigger something off inside of me. Even going out and seeing families together, that would also trigger something off inside of me. So it's something I carried for a long, long time.
Yeah, people do though. And I know people who have just realised long after the event, and they put on this facade and make it look like everything's cook and curry and everything's lovely and everything's fine with them. In fact, I have a friend who I was so shocked, and when I realised that she wasn't coping very well with the bereavement she'd had to deal with, and in all honesty, I wondered how she was coping so well, because she had 3 in such close proximity. And yet, she was always happy, always bubbly, always that kind of, always ready to talk, not knowing that she was eating away outside. And after I found out, I thought to myself, oh my God, I didn't even realise that she was suffering so badly. And why did she feel that? She couldn't talk about it with anybody. Why did she suppress it and keep it to herself like that? And people do, and they don't realise how much it affects them. But it really can affect you mentally, and that is why you should go and seek counselling, whether or not you feel that you need it, because then at the end you haven't lost anything and you can decide for yourself whether you needed it or not. We'll be coming back to this subject another time, but for now, thank you for listening. Peace out.
Bye.